before. I'm very happy to welcome everyone here in the room and also online to our first external seminar of 2023. This is a very special seminar dedicated to the work of the Death by Welfare project. So I'm very pleased to host the seminar. As usual, we will have presentations and then we will have some space for a Q&A and comments. You can make comments on the chat. You can make them via opening your camera and raising your hand as well. We will try to address as many comments and questions as we can. So the seminar today is entitled Resisting Welfare State Violence and Documenting Evidence for Justice, Sharing Learnings from the Death by Welfare project. And we have three speakers. First, we will have China Mills. Dr. China Mills is a senior lecturer at City University of London, where she researches and teaches global mental health and public health, with a focus on state and corporate production of harm, distress and deaths by suicide. And China is author of the book Decolonizing Global Mental Health, The Psychiatrization of the Majority World, published in 2014 by Routledge. And then we have, I think the order will be, then we have Rick Burgess is a disabled activist based in Greater Manchester. He co-founded the WOW petition, calling for a cumulative impact assessment of welfare reform. He also co-founded the Manchester Disabled People Against Cuts and is an admin of the Recovery in the Beam website and group. So he works at the GM Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People and the Lived Experience Advisory Board of the ESRC Center for Society and Mental Health at King's College. And he has survived several work capability assessments. And then we have Dr. Monica Sharman. Monica is a doctor working in A&E, currently studying a master's in public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And she's also a member of Medact's Economic Justice and Health Group. I'm gonna put some links on the chat with some resources and help for people who might feel distressed or who might think that need some resources. So this is available here, and I think that China is also gonna mention this a little bit in her own presentation. So that's it from me. I'm gonna leave China to start the seminar.
Okay, thank you so much to Chris for inviting us and for having us in this space, and for everyone finding the time to be here. Apologies, I've got my hat on, but I'm in Manchester and it's snowy, so I'm cold and I don't want to turn my heating on. So yeah, as Chris said, I'm gonna talk for a little bit, and then I'll pass to Rick and then to Monica. And this isn't like a, you know, we see this really as a conversation, and we're just as much interested in what we can learn from everyone here, and having that conversation with you and kind of bringing you with us on this journey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do a bit of a sort of content note, because there's just so much that's distressing and harrowing about this work, and I want to try and make this be as safe a space as possible to talk about this. Also just really important to resource ourselves and resource each other to be able to have these conversations, but understanding we come at this from really, really different positions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Deaths by Welfare project kind of more generally, and some of the stuff that we've been up to, and then link into Rick and Monica and explain some of the work that we've been doing together and that we also would like to do together, right? So in terms of the content, the Deaths by Welfare project talks about the brutal welfare system and how it kills people and people's deaths linked to that system. And every aspect of that, as you can imagine, is devastating and sort of truly enraging. And so what I'm going to call welfare-related deaths, I suppose, are deeply personal and also highly political. The project contains a lot of information about people's deaths, including people's suicides that are linked to the welfare state. But we won't in this session, and actually as the project as a whole, share any specific details, say about methods of people's suicides, just because that can be so triggering for people. We understand welfare reform related deaths by talking about them in the context of injustice and oppression and brutality and harm in which they take place. But we're still really learning how to talk about them and how to talk about the brutalities of the system without reproducing those harms. So just please tell us if we can do better. And I've got my contact details just at the end of this slideshow. So why I'm saying that is because I want you to take part today in a way that honours where you're at and how you're feeling, and that prioritises care. So please just do what's right for you. I think the session is being recorded, so it's always possible to return to this at another time if it turns out that now isn't good for you. And I think Chris has shared some resources, and please have a look on the Healing Justice London website, where there are also a whole other load of resources, including kind of ongoing sessions that you can tap into if that's helpful for you. Yeah, sorry, those are some of the resources Chris has shared. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of context, the Death by Welfare project is based at Healing Justice London, and Healing Justice London, or HJL, began as a collaboration by women of colour living in London. It builds on years of youth, community and survivor work, really aiming to restore agency to communities to imagine and organise towards liberation. And at HJL, we continue to lead from communities that are marginalised to try and shape and determine people's own health and well-being, and build radical alternatives, and kind of really be part of visioning and rethinking and reimagining what those alternatives might look like. And the Deaths by Welfare project then is a core part of a sort of ongoing strategy, piece of work programme at Healing Justice called Rehearsing Freedoms. And that currently is a 2-year programme of community-based healing, structural interventions, radical imagining, but also collective capacity building and restoration. And it's inspired by the work of Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and particularly their thinking around the need to rehearse the social order coming into being. So we need to be practicing and rehearsing what we want to see, what we want to see be in the world, like life-affirming infrastructures and the kinds of practices that we need for our liberation. So Deaths by Welfare sort of has gone in so many directions, and I'm going to try not to like bombard you with all the different threads of the project, but it started out as wanting to investigate the links between welfare reform and the welfare state and the welfare system more broadly, and people's deaths, including people's suicides, by centering and learning from the expertise of the people that are most impacted by welfare state violence, and especially from disabled people. And yeah, there's a lot of different parts of this work, and I'll tell you about just some of them. But the creation of a timeline, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, has been key to this work. All the way through, we've had workshops or kind of focus groups, I suppose you might say, around different aspects of the project, which have helped us inform strategy and accountability. We've got a podcast series, which aims to sort of bring to life key moments from the timeline. We've done creative commissions and worked with artists. And I'll share some of these things in a minute, but I suppose this is like a piece of research, but it's also trying to kind of think beyond that in terms of like movement building for justice and coalition building. So when we were co-creating the timeline, I think this started like probably beginning of 2021, but I could be wrong. And I reached out to the brilliant John Pring from Disability News Service and said, look, what do you think of this? Like, I feel this is important, but I couldn't possibly do this without you. And it started just a wonderful working relationship and friendship where it's been a real journey. So we created a version of the timeline based a lot on John's just extensive experience over and beyond the past decade, investigating and researching as part of Disability News Service. And then we involved and paid sort of consultants, I suppose, to look at the timeline and help us rethink it, what was missing. And the people that we did that with include Ellen Clifford, who's part of the steering committee of Disabled People Against Cuts, and the author of the book The War on Disabled People. Includes Dolly Sen, artist and activist. It includes Rick Burgess, who we've got with us here today, and also Nick Dilworth, who is a welfare rights expert, legal advisor around welfare. And so the timeline at the moment is just like this absolutely mega document. It's probably got over 500 entries. It dates from the 70s to 2022, and it spans a lot of pages. Oh, I'm just getting an echo. I think there's somebody unmuted.
Sorry, it's just that we have a corridor here and there's some people walking, but I closed the door, so it should be fine.
Thank you. Perfect, Chris. Thank you. And the timeline then is made up of largely publicly available documents. So what that relate to the deaths of disabled people claiming or trying to claim benefits. So there it includes freedom of information requests, prevention of future deaths reports, internal documents from the Department for Work and Pensions, the DWP, all kinds of documents that are nearly all publicly available, but are kind of well hidden, right? So you can get them if you've got the link, but they're all over the place and they're quite hard to find. And so a lot of that was just trying to bring that together into a kind of tool or a resource that people could use in multiple different ways. And yeah, we made a first draft available as part of a public consultation, and then received feedback from that, and are just at the stage now where we've incorporated that feedback, and I'll explain in a minute, but we're working towards creating an accessible website that the timeline will kind of be housed within. So why make a timeline? It sounds, I always wonder if we should have called it something different, because it sounds a bit, I don't know, no, it doesn't do it justice perhaps, but I think the timeline didn't come from any one single person. It came from the fact that a lot of disabled people's campaigning groups, activist groups, as well as a variety of other folks have created timelines or tried to create sort of shorter timelines. And I think a lot of people had talked to us about the importance of that in terms of collecting the mountains of evidence. So that's kind of what informed the idea behind that in the first place. And we wanted to create it to piece together a sort of chronology of evidence around welfare reform related deaths, as well as allowing you to kind of trace the strategies that are used over time by the DWP to deny their accountability in people's deaths. And so we pieced together all these sort of separate documents, and what that allows us, but anyone to do, is to look for patterns which remain hidden if we only focus on those documents individually. And it also enables us to track the delayed but deadly impacts of welfare policy, right? Because there's this kind of slow bureaucratic violence to this process where a policy might be introduced and you might not start to see some of the kind of fatal and deadly impacts of that until a little bit later. And so the timeline sort of is one way to try and represent those sort of slower forms of violence. And so I'm going to just give two examples from this, and I can put a link in the chat in a minute. I can't multitask, but the timeline is available as a Google Doc at the moment, just a massive load of text, and then it will be, we'll create something hopefully much more accessible from it. But what it allows you to do, for example, if you look at it, is that you could see what's happening politically in terms of key pieces of policy, legislation, what's happening in the media around the, explicit like dehumanization and demonization of people who are claiming benefits. So you can see those happening, and then you can start to see the evidence of harms that we see, but also of resistance. Okay, so for example, we see, like in 2008 with the white paper raising expectations and increasing support, reforming welfare, claims that everyone in capacity benefit will be moved to employment and support allowance, and it started to talk much more explicitly about conditionality and sanctions, and that was discussed in the House of Lords. Then you go to 2010 and the budget reveals plans to slash spending on disability living allowance through a new assessment process. We have Ian Duncan Smith suggesting that disabled people are basically to blame for that, and that's the reason that's going to happen. But then you can see also on the timeline the formation of what have come to be some of the key groups in the just resistance and protest and pushback around these very things, around welfare reform, and also the groups, only some of them, not all of them, this is just a small example, but who have played such an important part in showing the harms of welfare reform and how it is killing people. So you have like the formation of Black activists rising against the cuts, Barrack, the formation of the Black Triangle campaign, the formation of the Mental Health Resistance Network, a Mad Pride protest talking about savage welfare cuts, and the launch of Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC. So that, like, there's something in, you know, that's a small example of just some of the organisations and campaigns that launched in 2010 against this sort of this political context. And then what you can also see from the timeline, and this is something I wasn't sure about whether to include or not, but I have decided to, and I hope that was an okay decision, is you also start to see people dying. So you start to see that more and more people are dying, and that their deaths are linked to these very political moves that are being made and these policies. And so I think this comes with the acknowledgement that there are so many people that we don't know about whose deaths are linked to welfare reform. And so the people that are named on our current timeline are named there because there's been some kind of media coverage, or because their deaths led to prevention of future deaths reports, or inquests, or large legal campaigns that have really sort of shifted the kind of landscape of this and been key to resistance. But just to acknowledge that this is by far from, there are so many people missing from this timeline, right? And there's something quite uncomfortable about including some people's names over others, which is a real tension that we held. I'm just going to list some of those people so that you can see what that looks like to start to see this mounting up. And this is just a tiny fraction of the people who died in 2013, but I don't give any details about methods of suicide in this. Okay, so you can see on 9th of August 2013, Mark Wood starved to death after being found ineligible for employment and support allowance. The 23rd of August 2013, David Barr took his own life a month after he had learned that the decision to find him fit for work had been confirmed. 24th of September, Michael O'Sullivan took his own life after being found fit for work. And a coroner found that his assessment, so work capability assessment, was a trigger for Michael's suicide, and wrote a prevention of future deaths report to the DWP, saying there's a risk that future deaths will occur unless action is taken. 25th of September, so the next day, Tim Salter takes his own life after being found fit for work. A coroner later ruled that a major factor in his death was that his benefits had been greatly reduced and he'd been left almost destitute. And I just think, you know, a few people have commented with the timeline. There's a real, I mean, it's completely harrowing to list people in this way, but our hope is, I suppose, that it's also quite powerful to show as a sort of mobilizing tool, to show just in a tiny fraction of time just some of the kind of harm of the policies that we're talking about and of the welfare system. And so what our hopes to do with that, so turning it from a mega text document, the timeline, which it currently is we're working with Access Power Visibility Collective, who are brilliant, check them out if you've not heard of them, to build an accessible timeline for the website that will likely look a little bit something like on this slide, which is basically the date of the particular entry, particular categories that will allow people to search for certain things. You'll be able to filter for different kinds of content warnings so that it can be a sort of relatively resourcing and safe space for people. And our dream is to have an audio description, BSL translation, and to have easy read, just to try to make this as accessible for as many folks as we can. And what we're hoping is that the timeline will be a living document, right? So that people can submit to it, and so that it doesn't kind of, it's important as an archive, absolutely, but that it also, that we're able to kind of to keep this going and to keep tracking this. As I mentioned then, as part of the work, we've also released 2 podcast episodes, and the third one is going to be released probably next week. And those have been to almost take parts of the timeline and narrate them and give them a bit more detail with some of the key people that have been involved in campaigning and in resistance and in freedom of information request submission, etc., etc. So we've got a brilliant episode on resisting DWP violence with Paula Peters and Ellen Clifford and Dolly Sen. We've got something around benefit sanctions as weapons of state violence, and the next episode is on the reviews, the internal process reviews, previously called peer reviews, that the DWP carries out pretty secretly into people's deaths linked to the welfare system. And that's a conversation between myself, but mainly with John Pring and with Imogen Day, who's Philippa Day's sister and whose death is linked to this system. And I just, last couple of slides, really just wanted to also say an important part of the work then is, yes, it's documenting evidence, but it's also documenting evidence of resistance, and I suppose trying to do that, to think about where can that go next, you know, how can we vision completely different systems than we currently have. And creativity has been really key to exposing and resisting the violence of the welfare state. It's been a political strategy which shows the scale of harm, has been used to try to hold the government to account, but also to create some kind of way of honouring and remembering and naming that some of the people who've died. And we've worked quite a lot on the project with the brilliant artist activist Dolly Sen, and there's an image on this slide of Dolly and others stood outside the DWP head offices, holding up red cardboard hearts that have got the names of some people who've been killed by the state, and Dolly's holding a heart that says Broken Hearts for the DWP, which is the name of a film that she created based on this protest, and also interviewing the mum of Jodie Whiting, who's somebody else who died, Joy Dove, who stood in the picture and who features in the film. And so knowing that this kind of creative resistance is so important, we at the project, we worked with and commissioned for artists to try to kind of represent welfare state violence and do this sort of creative honouring of the people that have died. And I'm just going to feature one of these artists, and all of them are brilliant. I didn't choose this one with any, I could have chosen any, but one of the artists that we work with is the brilliant Zita Holborn, who's a Black dual heritage disabled woman, multidisciplinary artist and human rights equality campaigner. And she's also the co-founder and national chair of BARAC, of Black Activists Rising Against Cuts in the UK. And she produced a number of just beautiful images, and one of the 2 featured here is a digital image that says deaths by welfare, and written in the lettering are some of the names of people who've died. And another piece is a physical piece, I think using acrylics, I think, which represents has people's sort of faces in profile, and also names many of the people wh've died and whose deaths are linked to welfare reform, and says, written over that, protest, resist, campaign and lobby. And so really just in terms of next steps, and that's something we'll also just talk about more generally in this session, I suppose. In the next couple of months, we're going to have a series of workshops to collectively try and shape our strategy, and lots of them will be open. So we'd love to hear from anyone who's interested, especially people with lived experience of the system. And I suppose it just speaks to a broader aim of coalition building. So trying to develop and deepen analysis with diverse groups who have lived experience of navigating welfare state violence across perhaps a number of intersecting systems, so like welfare and immigration, for example, as well as interlocking oppressions, to just really try and imagine what life-affirming welfare systems might look like, both a part of holding the state to account, but also perhaps beyond the state. And there's an image on this slide, which is a double-page spread that John Pring wrote about the project in the Mirror, which was titled Death by Welfare, and features some of the pictures of people who have died. And so here's just to say, you know, here's some, if you want to find out more about Healing Justice or some resources that might be useful, and also my email, which is china@healingjusticeldn.org. So please just contact me if you're interested to hear more. And now I have the lovely task of passing you over to Rick, who's going to sort of take us on the next part of this work. And I feel like Rick needs no introduction, but yeah, Rick has just been such a central figure in so much of the resistance that we've been talking about, and the campaigning and of this work. And I think Rick wants to also talk to us about like where next, and what might this kind of look like as we go forward. So thanks for listening to me, and I'll pass to you, Rick.
Okay, you can take the slide down now if you want. I'm not going to use slides. Thanks a lot to China. Just first of all, I'm one of many people. Not everyone likes speaking in public. A lot of people under the DWP regime can't, because they fear reprisals. So just to sort of say, I'm just one of many. I'm not an important person at all. There's a lot of us. Many many invisible, and some are not with us here now. But first of all, I'd like to say the Deaths by Welfare project is absolutely essential. Recording of a hidden history, a history that the state would prefer no one wrote down, that no one paid attention to, because it is state-sanctioned harm. I like to use the term democide, which is the activity of state and its corporate partners to remove the means necessary to live in order to cause the end of life to a targeted population. It's not quite genocide, it's kind of like the manslaughter cousin of homicide. And in the last 10 days, I mean, the last 10 days have been quite illustrative of the atmosphere we still live under. So last week we had the Labour Party choosing to present their ideas, for want of a better term. Yep, social murder, I'm just looking at the chat, yeah. On welfare reform. Now, they chose to give that speech at the think tank created by Ian Duncan Smith, Centre for Society, Centre for Social Justice. Now, that choice was absolutely deliberate, was absolutely a signal, and showed absolute contempt for disabled people in the UK. It said, we are allying ourselves with the perpetrators of this violence, and we don't want to know about you, the victim population. That was clear, and we've got that message. Thank you very much, the Labour Party. You know, you can use words, but you can also, through your actions, we will judge you. And then we had just this week the court ruling on the legacy uplift case. So this is where during the pandemic, people on older benefits, ESA, were not given the £20 uplift that people on universal credit were, largely because, and I'll use my own language, is that fundamentally a lot of the working population suddenly had to claim universal credit. Now, this is a population the government has propagandized to hate people on benefits. So when they had to go on to benefits, the government had a bit of a problem because that population might find out how horrible it was. So they gave them a bit of extra money. So they didn't actually find out quite how horrible that was. The people on the older benefit didn't get the uplift, and they very ingeniously and with a lot of work, they have taken that to court, and they have appealed rulings, and this week was an appeal, I think, at the High Court, and they lost it. And what was interesting is reading the judge's language and the judge's reasoning, which showed, you know, that the truth of the matter is in an anthropological sense, culture is preeminent. The law, science, economics, whatever exist after culture, and that this judge absolutely is part of the society that has taken on board that people on benefits are a little bit subhuman, they're scroungers, they're not to be trusted, they probably should get treated worse than other people. So that informed that judgment. Today, we've had the ONS figures on the number of disabled people in the country. And that is, I would argue, is an undercount. It was done at the height of the pandemic. So it was difficult for people to fill it in if they were not digitally included. Its definition of disability is a restrictive legal one in line with the Equality Act. So that reduces the outcome. It also misses out the 1 million people with long COVID who developed that after the date of the census. So it's not a great count, but the strategic importance of it is that informs government activity for the next 10 years. So that will be based on an undercount of people needing support. So it doesn't look good for the amount of support we're going to get in the next 10 years. And then last week, I was writing a statement for coroner's inquiry, which we held next week, for a friend who chose to exit in the summer of 20. In the summer of 2021. So this is ongoing, and I would like to also extend my solidarity to other groups that have been targeted by the British state. Migrants, asylum seekers, people in the criminal justice system, people sleeping rough. All of these groups, the people subject to police suppression, it is ongoing. The British state is a long-term, longer-known international criminal. And while it in the past as an empire, it did a lot of this in an outsourced way across the world, it's now, I feel like it's applying this expertise to domestic population. Now it's got less of a playing field to do it on. And I think that what's important about this whole thing is not to separate it to just welfare. This is a symptom of a wider attitude of a ruling class towards people who it chooses not to favour with support to live, and in fact can enact hostile environments towards them. I think, again, in the last 10 days, you know, in terms of the Westminster political system, the national political system, there is not an immediate relief in sight. Small tweaks around a fundamental system that's horrible. So it's very important that this sort of project and these meetings happen, because the change is going to come from all of us. It's not going to come from a corrupt and remote political system. Although eventually we have to involve that and hopefully influence it for the better. I would argue for the victims of this, the survivors of this, for disabled people to feel that justice has been done, since that things have actually changed. I do think that ultimately the ideal would be that the DWP is abolished, that there is a truth and reconciliation process, and that there are some individuals who absolutely should end up behind bars in a process, you know, similar to other sort of justice after large-scale state violence. There is, I saw Ian Duncan Smith got mentioned. He's a bit of a sort of icon of this. I'll throw this link into the chat, but my friend Francesca Martinez wrote and starred in a play at the National Theatre called All of Us. And I'll put that link, and you can see it at the National Theatre at home now. And great play, you know, please pay to see it anyway, but it's got the best joke about Ian Duncan Smith you will ever hear. I'm not going to give it away, but I guarantee you it's money well spent, okay? Pay that money, watch that play. It's fantastically good joke. And the play's good as well. In terms of the prospect of that happening, of there being truth and reconciliation, of the abolition of the DWP, of there potentially being prosecutions of, you know, political criminals, whatever you want to call them, I don't think there's a likelihood at the moment under our political system. But I think it needs to be said that that level of harm has been reached, that level of trauma has been reached. When you've got a system that's been going for, you know, well, if you take it from the beginning of the introduction of ESA, that's 2009, so 14 years, but certainly the work on it was happening long before then. There's the infamous conference, malingering and illness deception in welfare benefits in 2001. There's the Immigration Act that New Labour passed, which removed social security support from people seeking asylum. That was maybe the beginning of this this chapter of the process, but it's been long ongoing. So what we have to do is, for civil society, for the professions, for activists, for groups like this, is first of all day-to-day survival, help people survive, but also to start drawing up that future, thinking about that future, and joining with other groups and campaigns on you know, the wider liberation of our communities, all of them, not to limit, not to, you know, just pick one out, but for, you know, there's a lot of political weaponization of trans people's identities at the moment. They will just keep doing this. They will move on. They will pick this group or that group. We must all fight together as one. In terms of, you know, how research can help, often what is funded in research is what helps the funders of the research want to do politically. So what gets funded is not necessarily what is good. So always think about, why is there money for this funding and what's the point of this being put to? Reach out to communities. A lot of universities seem remote from their immediate communities. I would reach out to them and find out what research those communities would find useful and co-produce it with them. Because the imprint of academic authority on an issue, particularly one where it's like this, it's hidden and it's directed at a group that they've sort of stigmatized. It's very difficult to get that kind of proof that will be accepted in the sort of mainstream discussions. So that sort of authority of a university is great. But also, just in a very simple way, is, particularly for health workers, is to actually consider helping people survive the DWP system and its associated contractors. And must never forget Maximus, Capita and Atos, the holy trinity of scumbags, who all of them together enact this system, and as well as, for that matter, the courts and tribunal service, although that's people appealing, so hopefully you can get some justice there. But to help people to consider healthcare actually in that more holistic way, and someone not being starved to death, not being put through the ringer of this system, is going to be a lot healthier, both physically and mentally. So welfare rights, welfare support, advocacy in that area actually should be really thought about as a public health activity. It is that bad. I'll finish with a very literal example. There's a great charity in Manchester called LifeShare, who help homeless people get sorted, and they've had the experience that they've got a rough sleeper, they've got them a flat, they've got them set up, they've got them some therapeutic activity, they've got the healthcare set up, and it's coming together. That person is picking up their life again. Then the DWP roll into town, reassess them, take away their benefits. They're back on the street in a week. So all those stakeholders, all that work, trashed by another government ministry. Of course, the DWP say how they do all these supportive things and blah, blah. I'm sure sometimes some of them do. And we know there are some good, I can't believe I'm saying this, there are some good people in the DWP, but they find themselves being edged out. The constructive dismissal that is directed towards people who are more compassionate is noticeable. At this point, it's a lot of some quite institutionalized people who are taught to sanction and taught to be very bureaucratic. So I just finish with that if you are involved in any kind of healthcare or public health, that you really do need to consider that where someone is involved with the DWP system, they probably need help with that. And that I sometimes see that the DWP being included as like one of the positive things, and think, well, I would really question that and take that with a huge grain of salt. If you need to go through this assessment system, if you need to claim benefits, if you need to appeal against them, you will need help and support doing that. The system is not set up to make that easy or make that stress-free. And particularly just if in the mental health system, we know that a lot of people in crisis are told that they have capacity, therefore if they want to kill themselves, that's up to them. Now that is being used as an informal way of gatekeeping to protect resources in the mental health system. That absolutely is not legal or ethical. And often that crisis is precipitated by something that has happened in people's benefits. So it really does have a massive impact at the sharp end of saving people's lives if you can help people with their benefits. And when people are in crisis, to really listen to them and not dismiss them, and not to use those kind of loopholes to deny services to people. Because again, this is all joined up. I think we joked earlier that maybe the government believes in intersectionality in a dark way, while we might believe in it as a way that we understand interlocking oppressions, and people have different privileges, and all of us have differing identities, but we can communicate about those things with each other. The government actually, through its various ministries, work together instead to sort of use all of those things against us. Just understand we're in the middle of this struggle, and anything you can do to keep people alive and protected from it, please think about doing that. And maybe there'll be some more things on that line coming about how to help people get some expertise in welfare rights, get some training, increase that capacity, increase that level of support that people could have, but also to bring that pressure on the political world, so that we don't get a situation where we have a Westminster consensus sharing the same stage of the think tank created by someone who most of us consider basically a war criminal. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick, and just massive solidarity as always. Thank you for what you shared. And yeah, the government doing intersectionality thing is such a, I think this is so important. And we part of this, like thinking about the joined upness of the system, the ways that state violence has got so many different connected arms in immigration, in welfare, in healthcare, led me to Monica and to Medact, which Monica's going to talk more about, and to some work that we've been doing together and want to do more of with healthcare workers, thinking about the sorts of harms that they witness with patients who are navigating both healthcare and welfare systems, the complicity of health workers and of the kind of health system, I suppose, more broadly, and also thinking about what allyship does already, when its practice look like, and what it could look like, including campaigning being a part of that. So I'm going to hand over to the brilliant Monica to talk about some of your experiences and some of that work that we've been doing together.
Thanks, China. And just want to say thank you, Rick, for sharing all of those stories. I know it's not an easy thing to be speaking about and discussing, but we really appreciate your time and your honesty with us. I'll just take some time now just to explain a bit about what Medact is and what we do. Fingers crossed my voice holds out until the end of the talk. I've got a bit of a cold, unfortunately. So I currently work as a doctor in the NHS. I'm also a member of the Medact Economic Justice and Health Group. And we're basically a network of healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, researchers, who are organising to address the widening health inequalities through a health justice lens by calling for actions that challenge the structural factors that shape health throughout our lives. So, for example, good quality and affordable housing, stable income and secure employment, and adequate social welfare and health. I know many of you listening today may be involved in research or academics, so I'll start there. From a public health research point of view, over the last few years, we've created resources for health workers, basically summarising the evidence of what we know about these wider determinants of health in an easy to understand and digestible way. And we show, for example, how universal credit in particular has had a detrimental effect on mental health, with evidence showing kind of increase in suicides, in self-reported mental health problems, and an increase in antidepressant prescribing amongst those who use the system. And as healthcare workers on the front line, we see every day the ways in which poverty and inequality make people ill. And when it comes to thinking about the role of the social safety net in creating this, for example, over the last decade of austerity policies, we've seen the benefit caps and cuts to welfare linked in with the mounting public health evidence, which suggests that austerity has been key as to why we're seeing so many lives cut short, particularly for the poorest 10% of people in England. During the pandemic, it came to light the UK has amongst the lowest statutory sick pay in Europe, which of course has implications during COVID-19 infectious disease pandemic, kind of forcing many people to continue working. And recently we've seen response to the cost of living crisis, which has meant that so many disabled people can't afford to adequately heat their homes and maintain essential medical equipment. And so we often think that as healthcare workers, we are picking up the pieces of government failures. And for so long now, we feel that we've been treating people only to return them to the very conditions that made them ill in the first place. And so just coming back to Medact, we see our role as health workers in challenging those material conditions which give rise to ill health through advocating and campaigning for better public health in solidarity with those most impacted. And so that's how I met China and the Deaths by Welfare project, to sort of build on these learnings and see how we can really stand in solidarity and become better allies with those most impacted by welfare-related harms. I'll just spend the next sort of 3 minutes or so just to summarise or introduce the workshop that we held last year. And this is mainly aimed at healthcare workers, ran jointly by Medact and Healing Justice, kind of exploring 3 main areas. So the idea of witnessing harms, the idea of complicity, how often healthcare workers are navigating histories and legacies of complicity within a system that often does harm, and rethinking allyship and how we can be better allies with patients most impacted. And really the aim is kind of for us to be kind of more of a reflective and exploratory workshop to understand the perspectives of healthcare workers, about the experience of supporting patients who are engaged with the welfare state, and how the welfare state and the health system interact, as well as building a supportive space to explore these quite difficult encounters together. So, for example, it included things like a visualization exercise and a free writing activity, kind of answering questions around what does welfare system harm look like for the people that you meet? How do you experience witnessing harm? What does it look like for you? As well as small group discussions on kind of, are you able to support patients experiencing the harms that were talked about? And specifically, what barriers do you encounter and what needs to change? And I think from my perspective, it was a brilliant workshop. I think we received a lot of positive feedback and engagement. And again, from my point of view, I think as healthcare workers, we're so used to working quickly and moving on to the next patient and firefighting. And I think for me, this was a very rare occasion where we've actually stopped to breathe and to really reflect a bit more deeply about what exactly is going on, and about, you know, the welfare related harms in its various forms and our own roles within the system. And while it was quite difficult to sit with initially, I think actually doing this with others in the process of discussing these themes with other people was actually really powerful, and realizing, you know, you're not the only one with these conflicting feelings. We also briefly discovered some next steps, which I guess we'll talk about, but I think at this stage I'll just pass back on to China to help us guide us through these themes of witnessing, complicity and allyship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. I hope your throat is feeling okay. I don't know, what do we want to talk a little bit more about the workshop, or time-wise, should we open up a little bit for Q&A? I'm looking at Monica and Rick here, but obviously you can't tell that because I'm looking at a screen. I don't know if Rick, do you have anything that you might like to sort of say in response to what Monica shared and to the work that Medact and Healing Justice have been doing, or if not, that's totally fine.
I'll just quickly say that I know about Medact from their previous brilliant work in other areas. And I think that it's, in my thinking, it's a brilliant example of that intersectionality, is that all of Medact's work together is brilliant. And I think that's something that just everyone support Medact, they're great. And support Deaths by Welfare, but this is, you know, this is the world, you know, I hope there's an eccentric billionaire watching who is just itching to throw some money at us.
That's always the dream. Thanks, Rick, and I can second that. That Medact are brilliant, and I suppose it's our kind of plan, and we'd love to hear from you, from folks about this actually, but something going forward that we would like to do, sort of deaths by welfare, healing justice with Medact, and obviously with people who have lived experience of both healthcare and welfare systems and the immigration system and multiple different systems, is understanding how to better resource healthcare workers to do allyship, and understanding from people with lived experience, of course, what that allyship can actually look like. And I think something that was really great about the workshop that we did together was the honesty of the people that took part, and kind of a lot of reflections on how healthcare training it's almost part of that is encouraging people not to believe what patients are saying, and obviously how that ties in with a much wider culture, media, governmental crafting of people who are claiming benefits as not to be believed, right? So there's all of these sorts of things intersecting with each other, which I think massively impact on what allyship and kind of building solidarity can look like. Monica, I can't really ask, I don't know how to ask you this publicly. I think we can. Do you want to say something briefly about the letter? And then we'll move into Q&A.
Yeah, so if my voice allows me, we kind of, as a Medact, the Economic Justice and Health Group, is myself, along with many of the colleagues, we were in a process of writing an open letter to the DWP. And this was around the withholding, basically, of the reports into the deaths that Rick mentioned. And so briefly, I'll just sort of go over what we wrote. So basically, we said that as healthcare workers witnessing at the health impacts of a worsening cost of living crisis, and how these harms disproportionately impact those who receive welfare, and particularly disabled people. We've noted the public health evidence linking welfare policies to worsening mental health. Obviously, we highlighted to attention the DWP's failures to publish reports into the deaths of welfare claimants, despite being told to by the Information Commissioner. And we created a list of demands, which include the immediate publication of these reports, to set up a full public inquiry, as well as an independent body to investigate future harms as a result of the benefit system. So these are basically demands which have been echoed across many organisations. We've had this signed by various organisations as well, and we'll be due to sort of send that and publish that on our website very shortly.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Monica. So perhaps now would be a good time to ask if anybody's got any questions, if you want to put them in the chat or unmute and ask them, or comments. I don't know if anything comes to mind for folks. Oh,
before that, I think we should give a round of applause for the very powerful presentations and thoughts, and lots of things to think and to feel about. So yeah, like the space is open for questions here or on Zoom. We'll try to make our best to address them. Okay, in my screen I have Felicity first, and then Jessie, and then Nineb.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you to you all for those incredibly powerful presentations. It's such an amazing set of projects that you're working on, so thank you very much. I just wanted to mention some work that we've been doing recently, which sort of resonates with what you were just talking about in terms of health professionals. And I just think it would be great to be able to have a conversation where we follow up with some of this work, because it sounds like we're doing quite sort of, well, things overlap, definitely. So we've been working very much actually inspired by your work, China, before on mental health and over medicalisation. So we've been running a de-stress project since 2016, which works to understand over prescribing in low-income communities, and we're working directly with health professionals to try and understand their perspective on this and some of the challenges that they face and why they make the decisions that they make when they have patients sitting in front of them. So we've been working for the last year on the sort of more applied part of this project, which is to actually try and work with a brilliant team of community partners, most of whom are on benefits, who are training GPs across 3 parts of the country to actually think about how they're delivering practice. And it's been super brilliant because the training team is made up of GPs and community partners who deliver this training in GP practices. And we've reached about 60 practices now, so it's about 500 health professionals. And we've done a lot of learning. It's been quite a brutal process, as you can imagine. Working in primary care when people are under pressure has not been the nicest experience, but it has been very interesting to understand the perspectives of GPs and other health professionals around over-medicalising and how things can be done differently. And we're putting some training resources together now, which our community partners are really leading the way on. So I just thought it'd be brilliant to be able to catch up and discuss the parallels in this work at some point. But thank you again for all of your work, all 3 of you. Thank you.
That sounds brilliant. Please contact us about that, and thank you for the work that you're doing as well. I think there's loads of crossovers there that the project, and I'm sure Medact would be really interested as well in exploring further.
So we will continue with Jessie and then Ninev, and then I'll move to the chat. So Jessie, please.
Hi, thanks so much, China and Rick and Monica. China knows me. I'm one of China's colleagues at City. I don't do work around this kind of stuff, but I wanted to attend today. I've had this kind of personal reasons, but also I just find it really inspiring. I teach students about public health and health inequalities, and so I've made lots of notes of the sites that you've sent because I'm going to use it in some of my teaching to the foundation year students, especially around structural violence. So thank you for that. But I just had a question, I guess for Rick and China, just more about, it's really kind of inspiring this work because I know it's kind of being done outside academia, so to speak, and I find that really inspiring because academia has so much kind of violence within its structures and so much kind of violence in terms of how it does research. So I guess my question is more about just how do you go about the kind of intricacies of this work, because it seems like so much information, you know, like that you've had to gather. I would just really like to know a little bit more about just how you've done it, like, you know, yeah, thank you.
I'll go first maybe, and then Rick, if you want to come in, that'd be wonderful. Lovely to see you, Jessie. Thank you for being here. I think this work, not kind of being positioned within a university per se, or and for lots of the reasons that Rick mentioned about the sort of politics of funding for the work to be positioned at Healing Justice London, which is a community interest company, so a non-profit, I suppose, essentially, that has kind of really well developed trusting networks and relationships, very, very ethical practice. That felt really important for me. I'm not sure if we would have got funding anyway from other sources like research councils, etc., but because the work is so obviously political, and I think that's how it should be, and I don't want to have to kind of couch that or pretend that it's not. It's not necessarily party political, right, because loads of them are involved in this, and they all inform each other, it would seem, about it, but it's certainly political in that kind of much deeper sense, and just in really like practical ways of making sure that that we have budget and can pay, you know, quickly the people that are involved, that there's flexibility in terms of how we pay people who might be claiming benefits, etc., has been so much easier through an organisation than, for example, navigating that through a university. So I think in that sense, yeah, that, and the sense of ethics on a deeper level of like doing this work that's just already. So there are disabled people co-producing this work, but the work is also totally rooted in analysis and knowledge production that especially disabled people and people claiming welfare have been producing for so long, and it really centers that analysis and that knowledge. You know, we're really clear that this isn't about, it is about people's stories, but it's about the analysis that lived experience gives you, and it's a much deeper form of knowledge. And so the project is really rooted in that, and I feel like that's where a lot of that's where the information comes from, like you're talking about, like building the timeline was massively involved in existing knowledge and existing work that's been done, especially the work of John Pring and Disability News Service, but many others as well, who not only document this but are living it. They're involved in it. They're the people that are submitting the freedom of information requests. They're the people that are doing direct action or the quieter sort of forms of resistance that have been so central. So that's the sort of knowledge that it's built on. Rick, I don't know if you want to come in there. Or...
I'll just say it just reminds me of something talking about earlier this week, that, you know, you kind of got this idea that we live in this sort of liberal democracy. And this, I was talking to some healthcare workers, and it's like, well, you know, they get fired if they put their name to some things, so they have to speak anonymously. And, you know, so, and this work happening sort of slightly to the side of the university system. And, you know, it's, we're really not the country we think we are. So I think I think that it's really important that not only does this work exist, but it actually challenges the establishment that thinks so much of themselves and gives themselves knighthoods and that kind of thing, and you know, just makes them question themselves and reflect on actually what. Are they meeting their professed aspirations? Are universities meeting their professed aspirations?
Thanks. So we're going to go with Bill, and then I'm going to move a little bit to the chat. I don't know if we're going to be able to address all of the questions, as I put some resources on the chat so people can find out more. And there's also the links and the email. So maybe some questions could be addressed by email, but let's try to do as much as we can. So Bill.
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's been great listening to you all. I'm a disabled activist. I'm a member of Disability Labour, and I know that the Labour Party isn't sort of like the flavour of the month with lots of disabled people. I understand that. I mean, one of the issues for me is that, I mean, I just say as well, as I've previously worked in public health, so I'm, you know, so I'm aware of all of the, you know, sort of the evidence collection and the issues around evidence collection. But it seems to me that the evidence is quite clear. The evidence of harm is quite clear at both a population level and an individual level, in terms of the deaths of disabled people who have starved to death in their own homes, committed suicide. And what's frustrating for me is that although the evidence is clear, there is a lack of progression in terms of holding the DWP to account in the courts. I mean, the DWP is a criminal entity which is exerting a system of coercive control, illegal coercive, criminal coercive control over the lives of disabled people. And yet we've failed to prosecute the DWP for the deaths of disabled people in the courts. So the question is, I mean, are you starting to look at how you can progress these issues towards the courts? I mean, are you working City University with your colleagues in the law department at City University to find a way of actually progressing this to the courts so that the DWP can be held legally to account?
Just quickly, thank you so much, Bill. And coercive control is such a powerful way of describing this. So thank you for naming that in this space. Not with the university. I'm not, though. That we could certainly explore that. But we have started having conversations with a brilliant strategic litigation organisation who are called Systemic Justice, who are really worth checking out. I'll put a link in a minute. Who do strategic litigation in a number of areas and want social protection and therefore welfare to be a sort of core part of their work going forward. So we're absolutely exploring that with certain different groups. I think there's a difference in, you know, there's holding people accountable through the law and also obviously recognising the limits of the legal system, which share many of the forms of violence that we're talking about in the welfare system, in the immigration system, etc. But certainly worth exploring all of these different kinds of avenues, and that's exactly what we hope to do with systemic justice. So yeah, thank you for asking that.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you very much. Cheers.
I just
Okay.
as
sorry, please.
The GM Coalition and Foxglove are involved in litigation with the DDP at the moment over their use of algorithms in disability fraud detection. So there are some challenges to the DDP going on, but yeah, it is super difficult. The state generally does not set the state up to be subject to the laws that they apply to people, by and large.
Okay, so there are many questions in the chat. Some of them I think could be addressed by looking at some of the websites that the speakers are sharing. Also on the initial Eventbrite link, there is information. There is a question about from Paul Atherton. He says, what is the overall aim, I guess, of the project, and how do you hope to change things?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you, Paul. I suppose there are a couple of main, I'm never very good at aims and objectives, and there are a couple of main things that we want to do here, right? So a first core part of the work has been about evidence, but with an awareness that demands for constant evidence can also be incredibly violent, and that this should be evidence on people's own terms. And I'm thinking about the way that people like Mia Mingus, like disability justice educators and activists, talk about the importance of evidence that's generated by, produced with, and comes from disabled people. So that kind of understanding of building an evidence base, I guess, that can resource our work, and the timeline is a massive part of that. The next, I mean, we've got strategy sessions coming up with people that will try to make it a more collective. I think we would like with the project for there to be a bit more collective decision making about where people want this to go next, and important questions about where do deaths by welfare and Healing Justice London come into that, and how can we resource perhaps other groups that are already doing certain aspects of this work, or what can we add to that? I think a broader aim for us is to move from a focus on harms in a way, and the evidence of that, into thinking how could we create the conditions that resource people to come together and really kind of reimagine much more life-affirming systems and structures and practices that may be around welfare, or maybe we think about it sort of so much more broadly and really vision those together. But in the current conditions that that we're all living, but that massively impact some people more than others, it's incredibly hard to do that kind of work when you're just incredibly distressed and traumatized from what's happening to you every day. So a big part of that is about doing that resourcing. And very much like Rick said, you know, all the way through this has been a challenge to ourselves to think about, you know, that there are certain, so what's meant by welfare related deaths, and this is actually a brilliant question in the chat, so thank you to the person that asked it, because it relates to this. and thinking, you know, that yes, this is absolutely about disabled people trying to or claiming welfare or being prevented from, but we could understand welfare related deaths much more expansively than that, like the deaths of folks that have no recourse to public funds, deaths in custody, and then it starts to really expand into understanding that those cross-cutting harms across different systems, the criminal justice or punishment system, immigration, healthcare. So I think the much broader aim is building coalition and solidarity to start to really kind of reimagine what these systems could look like. And at Healing Justice London, I think are quite good. You know, there's a lot of expertise and a lot of capacity to do that kind of resourcing work. And so that's a really big, important part of what we'd like to see. So it's like a research project, but it's kind of much more, it's much bigger than that, I suppose. And it's an intervention on a much broader scale.
Thanks a lot. Very helpful. One of the reasons I asked the question is I've sort of found myself in lots of meetings and lots of groups, and everybody seems to, as you mentioned, you know, there's tons of evidence everywhere. It's not being collected, so having it collected would be incredibly helpful. But it's that moving forward bit. Now, I'm a fellow at the Royal Society of Arts, and actually everything we're doing now is about this whole idea of a shift in society. So I've placed a link to a piece I wrote on that, and that's looking at how pretty much all across Britain right now, everybody's kind of done. And there is an optimistic sense that there's a new way of doing things, and more people want to do that. So I thought I'd just share that with you before I went.
Okay, thanks, Paul. One more question from the chat from Nicola Yates. She says, I'd like to ask China a methodological question. How does the project count a death by welfare? And more particularly, how do you deal with causation? I think this is a very important question as well.
Yeah, this is such an important question. Thank you so much for asking it. And it's something that when John Pring and I were making the timeline, and then more widely with other folks that have been involved, something that we have thought a lot about and are still thinking about. I don't have a well worked out formulated answer to this, because this is something that we're continuing to think through. On the timeline itself, I think I mentioned before, we felt incredibly uncomfortable, a real tension about, you know, whose names were going to be included on the timeline and why, in terms of who's died. What we decided to do was to, as I said, include people where there'd been significant media coverage, or where there'd been kind of where that person's death had led to kind of the production of a lot more evidence, I suppose, in terms of further freedom of information requests and then responses, prevention of future deaths reports, further inquests, or for example, coroners actually talking about things like the work capability assessment being a trigger for people's deaths. So that was sort of the justification in terms of the inclusion of certain people. But how we understand welfare related deaths, I suppose, a bit like I just said, is I think much more broadly than that, you know, and I think we would love to expand the next kind of stage in the timeline. I think we'll be expanding that in terms of thinking, especially, for example, about people who've been harmed and died through no recourse to public funds, because it's such an explicit weaponization of welfare, of which there are many, but such an exclusionary and explicit example. And the cause and effect, I mean, this is partly why we wanted to do the timeline, because the DWP have got this way of sort of acknowledging that somebody's death might be linked to policy, but then distancing themselves from that. They say, you know, that especially when we're talking about people who've died by suicide, that suicide doesn't have a single cause and it's complex, and that you know, the work capability assessment or whatever it is couldn't possibly be the sort of main cause. And I think there is truth to that. It is really complex, right? But there's also something massively important here about perhaps trying to shift our understanding a little bit of cause and effect in that sort of strict, confined way that we have it. And we've been thinking a lot with the concept of slow violence and with bureaucratic violence, and thinking about the really delayed effects sometimes of, they say, the introduction of a policy, and then the cumulative harms, you know, the sometimes years of harm and brutality that people experience before their death. And so really the timeline, because eventually you'll be able to search it in particular ways and move around it in particular ways, actually helps to shrink that in a way and to see cause and effect perhaps a little bit differently. So that's always been a key aim for us. And I should say that the DWP, not only is there that the delayed effects, but I think that's actively weaponized by the DWP, that delay, you know, that is used in a way that enables them to deny accountability. So shifting and making visible cause and effect in a bit of a different way is what we hope we can use the timeline for as a resource.
I'd say that
Oh, sorry, Rick, go ahead, please.
I mean, this is always difficult, but before getting to like quite nuanced questions about causation and stuff, have to observe that we have a system that even when someone writes a suicide note on the back of a DWP letter, the coroner is still not finding the DWP as the cause.
Okay, so we don't have much time. I'm just going to take the last question, and Marjorie is raising her hand. So for so long, so please, Marjorie, go ahead.
Hi, I had the great privilege of knowing Reverend Paul Nicholson before his passing, who created Taxpayers Against Poverty. And Paul would invite me into the all-party parliamentary group for poverty. It was the most satisfying thing to have all parties working together, both houses, House of Commons, House of Lords, all organisations driven by compassion, and all members of public that were driven by compassion to change the system. But what was shocking, very shocking, was getting government to listen to the care plans that we were developing. They seemed to have selective hearing, go deaf and blind to anything that you put forward, and that was a great shock to me. But bear in mind, they've also done that to the United Nations, because we have had the UN rapporteur for poverty doing a detailed investigation in the poverty of the United Kingdom. And the conclusion was a direct link to the DWP malpolicies and austerity. But yet that gets swept under the carpet in Parliament, and we need to keep reminding them of that.
Just say, we've also obviously had the United Nations inquiry into Britain. We're the first country on planet Earth to have found to have enacted grave and systemic human rights abuses of disabled people that amount to a human catastrophe. Well done, Britain. I just want to go before I'm literally going to just advertise two things. Greater Manchester Law Centre, they just before Christmas won a brilliant victory on the amount of support for asylum seekers. Support your local law centres. Maybe think about teaming up with strategic litigation. Who knows? Maybe we might think of doing something with them. And the other plug, shameless plug, because he is too modest to do it, but go to Disability News Service, sign up for put a monthly subscription to it, so that they can continue doing probably the most essential news in this country. And there's the link in the chat. Disability News Service, John Pring's work, just literally all the journalism awards should be his by default, full stop.
Okay, so yeah, Peter, go ahead. You have the last question, and then we'll close. Peter Kyo.
Oh God, sorry. I was hanging around for a long time. I actually think that a lot of what I really wanted to touch on is being said, but really just to think about not only in relation to institutional or but actually to think about epistemic violence. Specifically, I was really struck, China, by what you said about not doing this work with the university because it's political. And I know, by the way, I know that you know this, but of course, all of that neutral evidence agenda work that universities does is profoundly political, but makes claims to being technical. And it is highly, highly violent. So there really is something about really using these forms of knowledge production, because this is an amazing knowledge project and really surfacing views and perspectives that are just not visible in the policy arena, to also, I guess, call out and critique the evidence, the so-called neutral evidence agendas and the epistemic violence that are perpetuated both within universities, our research institutions, and of course public health more generally. Sorry, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, I don't know if China or anybody wants to come back to what Peter just said.
No, just to say I absolutely love that, and maybe we can be in touch about that. I think that's such an important point, because that epistemic violence goes throughout this kind of slower forms of and bureaucratic violence that we're talking about. And so using, that this is a knowledge project and the knowledge production in that way around evidence. No, I love it. I've written it down. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for just brilliant things in the chat and brilliant questions, and it's just been really, really rich. And do reach out to us at the project if you've got any further questions or would like to get involved, and sign up to the Healing Justice London newsletter, as well as subscribing to Disability News Service.
Okay, well, that was great. Thank you for the presentations, like very, very powerful, very interesting, and kind of a very joyful way of mixing up activist and academic orientations and concerns in a way that we don't see happening so often. So it's been great, and thank you everybody for joining the meeting. So I'm gonna, no questions here? No.